Our guest today is Susan Teskey, and Susan is writer and director of a new show that's coming up tonight on the nature of things called Searching for Cleopatra. And
Mm.
Susan, thank you for joining us today. It's lovely to have you with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a
The
pleasure to talk about her.
there is we could go on for hours on this topic, and I think a large part of it, Susan, is that there's this fascination with ancient Egypt, a civilization that spanned 3,000 years and is so rich with incredible art and history. And I think virtually everybody is fascinated. And your topic is searching for Cleopatra. And I thought we might start by asking you, why is Cleopatra so important in Egyptian history?
Well, what's interesting about Cleopatra is not only was she important in Egyptian history, but she's got staying power unlike almost anybody else. I mean, she's still an object of fascination now, which really is quite unique in many ways. There aren't many people to rival her for that kind of, maybe Julius Caesar. But to go back, she was actually the last pharaoh of Egypt. She was the last queen of Egypt. And so right there, she, in a sense, is the bookend of that 3,000 years of history. Now, she wasn't actually Egyptian. She was uh, the last ruler of a group called the Ptolemies, who were actually Greek Macedonians, who had ruled Egypt for hundreds of years. And uh, she the Ptolemies were, as I say in the documentary, an odd bunch. They were, even by the standards of the day, which was ruthless, they really kind of set a very high bar. And they had this peculiar situation where they wanted to, of course, hang on to power. And the way they did that, they thought, was to essentially marry their siblings, marry their brothers and sisters. So you had this enormous level of incest, you know. Um, but the other thing that happened was, far from making it safer to be on the throne, actually it was more dangerous, because what you tended to do was then kill your brother or sister, husband, wife, so that you could stay on the throne. So the first thing that Cleopatra does, and she comes to the throne when she's 18, and she is married to her younger brother, who rules with her. Now, her younger brother manages to drive her off the throne, and but instead of going away and hiding in a hole and waiting for them to come and get her and kill her, she goes into the desert and raises an army. This is a teenage girl who goes in and raises an army. She knows the only way she's going to save her life is to fight for it. And this, of course, is the beginning of the famous story that has gone down both in history and Hollywood, when Julius Caesar pitches up and from Rome. And she knows that if she wants to survive, she has to get to him before her brother does. The problem is that her brother's army is between her and Alexandria. So she undertakes this extraordinary journey where she goes up the Nile, back down it, and is smuggled into the palace. Not in a Persian rug, as the movies have it, but in a sack. And meets Caesar, who is both, I think, astonished at what this young woman pulled off and absolutely charmed by her. She saves her life, she gets the throne, and about 9 months later, she has Caesar's child.
Wow.
So she was a fast worker. But this kind of is a classic story of Cleopatra. She was a tremendously courageous, charismatic, resourceful woman of that era, and she goes on to rule until she commits suicide when she's 39. But she rules Egypt for that period, which is an incredible accomplishment, given that the Romans are, as I say in the documentary, the big dogs of the Mediterranean world. And she almost alone manages to carve out a niche for Egypt and for herself in maintaining an independence that almost virtually no one else in the Mediterranean had. I mean, that alone
Mhm.
tells you something about this extraordinary woman.
Now, you mentioned that she committed suicide when she was 39. Is there any information that leads us to understand why that happened, why she did that?
Well, this is one of the problems going back to the Romans. They were the big problem in the Mediterranean. I mean, after Caesar is assassinated, um, and she is actually in Rome. Something people don't realize is that Caesar has brought her to Rome. They maintained a relationship, and there was some even in Rome at the time talk about was he going to make her queen of Rome? Which
Wow.
may have actually been a factor in. There was this concern: was he wanting to be king, and was she going to be his queen? But she was in Rome when he's killed, and she leaves Rome for obvious reasons. She then is in a situation where and this is in the documentary, where she has to choose who is going to end up being ruler of Rome, because she knows that whoever it is, she has to be able to have a relationship, a political relationship apart from anything else, with that person in order again to maintain the independence of Egypt. And she is driven by that. She's not driven by, the sex kitten scheming woman. She is actually, which is, what she's portrayed as, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. But, she wants to hang on to her country and her empire. I mean, she also has an enormous empire. So she has to choose. And there's two people. There's Octavian, who Caesar put as his heir, and there's his best pal, Mark Antony. Well, she chooses Mark Antony. And in fact, they have not only a relationship and three children, but they actually work together to extend an empire in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. Of course, he and Octavian fight for the control of Rome. Antony loses, and they retreat to Alexandria. And, in that situation, basically, either they kill themselves or they let Octavian do
Yeah.
it for them. And they decide, no, we'd rather, do it ourselves. So in fact, with Octavian outside the palace in Alexandria, she knows, that there's no way out for her. And she is determined not to be paraded in chains, which is what they did, with their captives. And she would have been, quite a prize for Octavian. So she decides to kill herself. Now, how she kills herself, who knows? I mean,
Yeah.
again, Hollywood, the snake at the breast, which I thought was a very convenient place for her to choose to, to be bitten. Gives painters in Hollywood lots of latitude. But she probably poisoned herself.
Yeah.
She did know her poisons. Poison was a favored method, actually, of killing others apart from yourself. And she certainly knew her poison, so she probably poisoned herself.
Now, your program is about the search for Cleopatra's tomb.
Yes.
And tombs and religion, the whole religion surrounding all of that was very important in Egyptian life. It wasn't just a show for show's sake. It was really an intense part of how they lived.
Huge. It was huge. And, there were hundreds of gods and goddesses. And she, of course, is a god. I mean, the Egyptians considered their pharaohs living gods. And she considered herself to be Isis, really, who was, a major god in the Egyptian world. And one of the reasons why this documentary focuses on a new search for her tomb has never been found. No one knows what happened to her or to Antony, incidentally, who of course, also killed himself in Alexandria. Neither of them have ever been found. Um, and so the documentary focuses on a dig, an archaeological dig that is in a temple complex called Taposiris Magna. And it is a huge burial ground. There was a massive temple there to Isis, and the feeling is now that that may well be where she is buried. Alexandria, the palace, the royal palace, was in Alexandria, but there were a series of earthquakes in the first century AD, and much of Alexandria, in fact, slid into the ocean. And for quite a while, the thinking was that she was underwater, her tomb was underwater, but there has been fairly extensive searching done, and they haven't found her. So now attention has focused to this area just outside Alexandria. And it's, I think they could be getting close, which would be extraordinary. It would tell us so much about her life.
Well, Kathleen Martinez, who has been working on this project for 14 years now, incredible.
Archaeology is slow work.
Painstakingly slow.
Yes.
But Kathleen, and in the program, some finds are uncovered. And I would think that each time there's a small step forward, this is the adrenaline that keeps the search going forward.
Well, I think that one of the things that you absolutely have to have as an archaeologist is patience. I mean, it's just not, there's no like instant gratification here. I think, again, as I say, I mean, they really are sifting through the desert grain by grain. It's not, you can't just bring in a backhoe and, hurry it along, because what's astonishing is every little thing that you find is revelatory, is another piece of the puzzle. I mean, there's a section of the documentary that is quite wonderful, quite stunning, about the coins that were discovered. Of course, one of the things in a temple is there are offerings. And one of the offerings, just like in Rome and the Trevi Fountain, is people put coins, offer coins. And coins are one of the most coins have one thing on them. They always have the face of the ruling monarch. And so her face is on those coins. And so it offers the best clue as to what she really looked like. And it wasn't Elizabeth Taylor. No. And we have recreated a model of what, based on the coins and other research, what she indeed probably looked like.
That was a very exciting point of the program. And I know people are going to absolutely love seeing that, because although she wasn't an Elizabeth Taylor, but she was a very powerful, intelligent, she was well schooled in languages. Yes. She was a great politician, so much that made her a fascinating person in history.
Yes, and a powerful person. I think that one of the things about this documentary, and it's partly the searching for Cleopatra is searching for her tomb, of course, and trying to find where she was buried, but it's also searching for who the real woman was, because she has been, you say Cleopatra, everybody thinks of Elizabeth Taylor, or they think in any case of a kind of a seductive, cunning, sex kitten kind of thing, who seduced, these Roman generals, and powerful Roman men. And that's what she used sex to, to get ahead kind of thing. And that is all so ingrained, I think, in our image of her. Now that image, it's fake news in a way, right? Because the Romans, and it also goes to who gets to write history. Well, in this case, not only did the men get to write history, which of course they always have done until recently, but in this case, it was the Roman men who were writing history. And the Romans were not pals of Cleopatra. They saw her both as a threat politically. She was Egypt was enormously wealthy. It had enormous wealth, much more than Rome. Alexandria was a city, the capital of her empire, was a city that made Rome look like a backwater.
Wow.
You know, it was unbelievably spectacular. And we do some CGI recreation of what that city might have looked like. It had the biggest library in the world. Scholars came from all over the world to study there. It was a huge trading nation. Really, the architecture was spectacular. And it's interesting that both Julius Caesar and Octavian, in fact, after being exposed to Alexandria, decided, well, maybe we should spruce Rome up a bit, which really is what gives us the ancient Rome that we think of. But they didn't like her. They were not probably very happy that every time one of their big generals showed up, they kind of made an alliance with Cleopatra. And so they wrote a history that demonized her in a way, that sexualized her, and that downplayed her intelligence, her enormous level of education, her skills, her administrative skills as a queen, her political skills, and she becomes reduced to this kind of conniving sexual predator. The other thing is that plays into this, and again, it's very modern, was that she was Eastern. And the Romans had this rather interesting both attraction to and fear of the other, what they, that kind of exotic East. It was very, very much that kind of thing. And she represented that. So she represented this kind of exotic danger to them. And that also gets reflected in how she is portrayed by them. Unfortunately, not only the earthquake, but there was an enormous fire at the Library of Alexandria. And so much of the contemporary writing about her from Egypt was lost. And so again, doubly, they got to control the way she was seen by history.
Well, your program gives us a fascinating insight, and we get to see how the dig goes on. We get to see some of the land around it as well. And I think your CGI creations are absolutely fascinating. People are going to love this show. And I want to thank you for taking time to chat with us today.
It was a lot of fun doing it. And I think, you know what, it's a lot of fun watching it too. I mean, it's exciting. It's exciting to find out more about this iconic historical figure. And it's exciting to be in the dig. And there's some real wonderful surprises there.
Well, that's on tonight. It's called Searching for Cleopatra. It's on CBC TV at 9:00. And it's also on CBC Gem. And I want to thank you, Susan, for taking time to chat with us. This has been a lot of fun.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Our guest today has been Susan Teskey, and Susan is writer and director for the Nature of Things documentary, Searching for Cleopatra. It's on tonight.